And Lenny, you were right. I'll never doubt you again. At this point, I'd like to do a little the introductions of the panelists. We have panelists from Trane, Siemens, Honeywell, and Markham. And we'll start in the order that they're going to be sitting, I guess, if everybody could take a seat. Start with Paul McMurphy. Paul is the Director of Digital Solutions for Trane. Paul, why don't you tell us a little bit what you do on a day-to-day basis relating to the Internet of Things?
Sure. So, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. I didn't know IoT was that big of a topic for everybody to come out, but we appreciate that. But I lead Trane's Digital Solutions team, which pulls together a lot of the buzzwords we hear around big data, analytics, and cloud. IoT, it plays an important part of that, and hopefully we'll get a little bit deeper into that today, of really taking the data that we've always had in our buildings and our sensors and our systems, and really being able to pull that together and visualize it, but more importantly, then go do something with it. And whether that is automation, whether that is visualizations, whatever that is, it's going to be interesting. A couple of years as this technology continues to change at a very rapid pace. Who would have thought just a couple of years ago about the self-driving cars and the amount of traction that has gotten in the industry? We see the same thing happening in Internet of Things to be able to push this along. So with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next, our next panelist is Stephen Henigman from Siemens, and he's the National Product Manager. Stephen, if you'd like to give your elevator speech.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joe. As Joe said, I'm a National Product Manager for Siemens Building Technologies. The product we manage is cloud-based energy analytics. It's a platform called Navigator, and in the last year we've announced a partnership with IBM to take our platform into the next generation of IoT and analytics. So really excited to see all the momentum in the industry.
Thank you, Steve. And next is Richard Washburn from Markham Accountants and Advisors. You're a forensic analyst. Why don't you?
I'm kind of the bad guy of the group. I honestly expected to be beaten up in the parking lot after this, and after meeting some of these guys, I'm almost sure of it. I poke holes. I look for vulnerabilities. I look for ways to hack everything from IoT to your computer to your cloud, and again, I'm the one they love to hate.
And Richard's from the South Florida Technology Alliance group. So one of the reasons we wanted this here, not just have 80 people, but we wanted that differing point of view from basically the people that are manufacturing systems. And lastly, Greg Turner with Honeywell. Greg's the Senior Director of Global Offerings and Tech Services.
Yeah, so I'm responsible for Honeywell's buildings business globally from a technical services and lifecycle management perspective. And my view on IoT is that ASHRAE is actually getting ready to celebrate an anniversary. It is in 2 months, in June. We will celebrate the 30th anniversary of a little bitty gathering in Nashville, Tennessee that resulted in what was called 135P at the time. That was the beginning of what today we know as BACnet. And my belief is that IoT is that next big thing, that after 30 years of being able to control our own destiny, control our own protocol, that we are about to be merged with something far bigger and more powerful than just something that the building management industry defines and controls. The other thing I would suggest is that it took 7 years from the time that group met in Nashville until the time that 135 was published as a standard. The world's moving a whole lot faster these days for us. And so as we look forward with IoT, everybody defines it a little bit differently, but what is clear is our future has been defined for us. And we've got to decide from an industry perspective how we play along.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you all. Guys, thank you for your vision of the Internet of Things. Of course, all of us here in one form or another deal with commercial buildings, in either airports, healthcare, commercial office buildings, retail. either we're designing them, we're building them, developing them. In our discussions about the Internet of Things, it makes sense for us to tie the two together. How will the Internet of Things interface with commercial buildings? So my first question is going to be, first of all, what do building owners, managers, or occupants care about? And then my follow-up question is going to be, what areas of the facility does the IoT align with? Paul, do you want to start? We'll just keep rotating.
Sure. You know, when you take a step back, you think about facility manager and owner, they're really there focused on business results, right? So how does IoT leverage that building to make it, instead of a cost to that business, how do you make it into a competitive advantage? And I think the exciting thing about IoT is it combines building data with business data. And when you can pull that together, now you can start to uncover a whole bunch more opportunities to optimize the building, to optimize the, different, wherever the vertical market is. So think about like ticket sales, right? So how do I take ticket sales, which is a core business for, let's say, a theater, and be able to pull that in and understand how to go make better control decisions inside that theater to make the occupants cover. So you can think about the different vertical markets, from healthcare to manufacturing, to be able to take that customer data and combine those two. And so I think this is going to open up a whole new world of partnerships, right? Because no one person has all that information or data to be able to pull that together to really drive that customer value.
Thank you, Paul. Good point. Stephen, would you like me to repeat the question or just dive into it?
I think I'll dive in.
Okay.
So our industry research has shown, there are several challenges that facility managers are faced with. We live in such a reactive, maintenance-based world, and we've really got to change the culture of that to be more proactive and also more predictive in the type of analytics and facility management culture we're taking on. I mean, in addition to that, we're facing increased energy and sustainability goals, and then at the same time doing it all with less money. And so that, in combination with our occupants who are more and more concerned about the occupant experience and making sure they're safe and they're comfortable. And we're really only going to be able to do this through people, process, and technology. So just technology is not going to get us there. So we want to make sure we combine all of those things together.
Thank you, Steve. Now for the evil panelists.
Well, I would agree with there's a nexus point between the people and the technology. And a lot of what I look at is where you have a vulnerability in the technology, that can be engineered out. And there's a breakdown when that hits the road, or in this case, the building. You lose the concern for security. You lose the concern for keeping your data from being able to be leaked, or your facility from being hacked. Before you kept your building from being hacked by putting locks on the door. Now you can break into a building without physically being at that building. You're gathering data. You're keeping information about your occupants, your users, people that access the building. What happens to that data? In a lot of cases that goes to the cloud. That's not even in your building. I don't need to hack your building. I can hack a cloud that's nowhere near your building. There are concerns that I think that in most cases building management does not look at as an everyday organic thing. People are used to looking at the brick and mortar. People are not used to looking at the zeros and ones that they never see.
Yeah, I think when we talk about what building owners, building managers, and the C-suite above them is really focused on right now, it's not altogether new. Businesses hate surprises. Public, private, it doesn't matter. And particularly in the facilities world, very constrained budgets, both from a capital perspective and from an op cost perspective. And so what they want is this combination of as much certainty as they can about today and as much future proofing as they can have for tomorrow. One of the concerns that our customers raise frequently about IoT is, wait a minute, IT has a 5-year life cycle. My building system has a 20-year life cycle. I'm not interested in air handlers and chillers with a 5-year life cycle. Let's think through this. So they want that certainty, and I would tell you that they are beginning to be faced with incredible uncertainty. Many of you probably have heard that on March 11th, the wholesale price of power in California went negative. There was so much solar on the grid that the utility was literally paying people on the wholesale market to take their power. Last year in Germany, a company suggested that they were going to begin to have unlimited power plans at certain times of day. The market in which our customers, commercial buildings, public buildings operate is changing on them at a very rapid rate. And one of the things that they're turning to the IoT for is protection, future-proofing, predictability in terms of how they are going to exist. It is about people, it is about the business environment, but it's very, very critical to them that they understand their costs today, and they're really, really well prepared for the market environment they're going to have to operate in tomorrow.
Thank you, Greg. It seems to me that building management systems, and for those of you that don't know what building management, that's the computerized systems that control the air conditioning, the lighting, interface, security, fire. For the last 50 years, this has been a tool to help building staff manage their facilities. First of all, would you agree? And then second, how's IoT going to change that in reference to building management systems? Stephen, you want to start?
Yeah, I do agree with that. You know, in some respects, I feel like when we made the transition from pneumatic to DDC, that was kind of a little IoT. You know, we all had connected devices. If you consider Internet of Things just a bunch of connected devices, that's what it is. And the information that I think we're expanding that by just adding more and more connected devices, and it really wraps around, I think, a few main categories. You know, we have the energy and sustainability aspect. We also have the building performance aspect, and then we just have the asset management aspect of operations and maintenance. And so from a sustainability aspect, you know, you can't manage what you don't measure. So we really need platforms and capabilities that can turn data, turn the ones and zeros into information we can understand, to make it transparent, to know that we are hitting the goals that we set out to hit in a proven way. And then on the building optimization side, using fault detection and diagnostics to ensure that assets are not only optimized, but that they're working well together. You know, you could have all your assets performing extremely well, but if they're all doing it at the same time, it could be a really bad thing. And then that kind of leads into the operations and maintenance, you know, taking this information and just doing things in a better way. You know, when we went from pneumatic to DDC, you know, it was a tough transition. We had to learn some new skills, but I think in the end, the reason we did it was a better way of doing things, and I think IoT will be a similar transition.
Yeah, I would agree with, you know, your first question. As we create this, you know, this Internet of Things and add more and more surface area to the digital aspect of a building, you're creating more of a collection point. So you're gonna look at more data analytics growing out of this. You're gonna look at new ways to manage your building, to manage the traffic of a building, the security of a building. You're also going to create more attack surface, more ways that you can end up with a problem that you were not prepared to deal with. You know, a few cases, there's been If anyone's heard of a Bricker bot recently, over 1 million devices disabled with a single line of code. Devices that many of us even have in our homes, simple devices. One single line of code, no more than 15, 20 characters, shut them all down indefinitely. There's no repair, there's no fix, there's no coming back from it. In your home, that may not be a big deal. You go out and you buy another $200 device. In a large building, you might have shut down your air handler. And now everyone in your building doesn't have air conditioner. Or here in Florida, that's a big deal, but if you're up north, you might not have heat. So there's going to be an evolution. There's already an evolution of IoT. There's going to be even more evolution, and a lot of that is going to be centered around data analytics. In my case, I see a lot of that analytics being done in the cloud, which again creates more attack area, more surface where something can go wrong, something can be hacked. Even if it's not a hack, a failure, you've created a single point now. All of your data, your access points, your security, are all going to one place. What happens when that cloud has a problem? Is there a backup locally? Is there some sort of fallback position when it comes to your IoT surface?
I think it's true that building management for the last 50 years has been very focused on a very narrow audience. It was the technicians, it was the facility managers. It was a very internally focused game. The reality of IoT is that's already changed. And it's changed not so much because the technology has changed, but because business has changed. And I'll relay just a quick story about what we saw in a hospital recently. Hospital rents out its medical office building to the tenants. The tenants came back to the hospital and said, we need to find a way to reduce the portion of our lease costs that's related to operating costs. Hospital go off and come back with a proposal to the doctor's committee around how we're going to reduce the cost of the operating portion of these leases. Hospital turned to us and said, number one thing in terms of cost in that building is utilities. What are you going to do about it? We need an answer. And we said, well, good news is that hard drive down in the basement has been logging that data for the last 10 years. We've got the data, we just need to look at it. And we real quickly pulled the data on the building, and then we went to another system by another company in another place, and we said, we need to understand the occupancy in this building. And they dumped out all the access control data for us. And a real smart analyst sat down with a spreadsheet and put the two together and went, hey, there's something really weird here. The building is operated from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturdays. The doctors don't have hours on Saturdays, but they use that time for their billing clerks and their staff to come in and catch up and do things. And when we overlaid the utility costs over the number of people using the building, those billing clerks were costing those doctors $638 an hour. Now, we gave this back to the hospital CFO, and he said, hey, can you show up Friday for a doctor meeting with the doctors to show them this? We said, yeah, sure. It was a 4-minute meeting. We showed them the data, and they were like, are you kidding? We'll never have people come in on Saturdays anymore, and if they do, they don't need air conditioning. That data had existed for 10 years. It had always been there. It was nothing new. What was new was just connecting the dots. Those are the kinds of users that we're going to see in the world of IoT in buildings.
So I'll come at this from a couple of different perspectives. If you think about the systems of BAS over the last 35 years, we've gone from proprietary protocols to a lot of the great back network that happened, to LAN talk, to Modbus, a lot of interoperability. And that has enabled the BAS systems to evolve. You think about when you talk to customers and the requests of integration over the last 10 or 15 years, from security, fire, lighting, all the automation, we've been on this journey. I think it just has not been at the pace that we are seeing it today. And I think finally the building, and I would say the facility managers are coming out of the basement and now being part of the business. And the business is really looking at it because it has been one of these fixed costs type of situations, and really engaging with the building facility managers and saying, how can we do better? And a lot of that started with the green movement, right? To be able to say, how do we become greener? Absolutely, we've been mining this data for so long. The challenge is, what do we go do with it? And I think the new technologies of getting that data out from the basement to the cloud, again, combining it with other data sources, whether it's business data or temperature or occupancy, whatever that is now being able to put a new lens on that data so that the rest of the business can understand it. Right? How do we put it in their terms so now they can make decisions about it? Whether it's how to purchase energy, whether it's adjusting schedules, whether it's adjusting what the temperature in a room is. Now we can have those real discussions as a business to understand how we can go impact that from a day-to-day perspective.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, for a change, I'm going to ask everybody out here a question. How many people have doorbells in their house? Raise your hand. Some people don't have doorbells. Okay, so I have a doorbell, or had a doorbell, from the 1950s on my house, and the lights still worked on it, right? So the bell rang, worked fine. But I saw a new device out there that shows photos and you can talk to the people at the door, so hey, I went out and I got that. I've got a feeling that that device isn't going to be around 50 years from now, whereas my doorbell was, with that light still burning for 50 years. I've got photographs of my great-grandparents on paper that's over 100 years old. But I worry that all the hundreds of pictures I've got on my hard drive might not be there in 5 years. Given that, should building owners, designers, worry about introducing the Internet of Things into their buildings? After all, chillers, building systems, they last 20 years plus. Am I reducing the lifespan of my building's infrastructure by going with the IoT? Who wants to?
You know, where are you at? You really are. You're not. Your chiller's still going to last 20 years, but the control system's not. The control system's going to need to be regularly updated. You're going to get firmware. Your doorbell will have a software update at some point. On the same side, you're going to have that doorbell is connected to your home wireless network, and it's sitting on the outside of your house. It's got a camera on it, and it has access to your home network. Now I don't need to break into your house to steal data. The photos that you're worried about losing that are stored on your home computer digitally, maybe I can access them and take them. You may not care, but maybe if I were to delete them. There's a lot of angles on this. Your building control systems, they're going to need to be maintained more often, more regularly. The actual hardware, the chillers themselves, they're going to continue to work. You are going to need more of an IT guy to upgrade them rather than a service technician. So there's going to be a change in understanding on how you deal with the longevity of these devices. Like if a product breaks down, you can repair it. If a vulnerability is discovered, you need to patch it. You're going to need an education. Honeywell, Greg was telling me about was it 270, how many pages?
274.
274 pages of security protocols dealing with IoT devices. So you're going to hand that to your building engineer, and he's going to keep your system, your IoT system upgraded, or you're going to hire a compliance firm like Markham that's going to go through and look at the vulnerabilities and look at the processes and look who's trained. Because now you're going to transition from someone who's technically trained on how to repair a piece of equipment to somebody who understands what's going on in the real world outside your building that poses a threat to whether or not that equipment turns on. We all had the old Bell phones. If you plug them in right now, they will still work. just like that doorbell. You plug them into a phone line, they will ring, you will answer the phone, and they work. You're not going to send a text message, you're not going to take pictures of your kids, you're not going to tweet. So there's a trade-off. You're looking at, I have features that I never would have imagined before, but it's, you know, now I have responsibilities that I never would have imagined before also. There's going to be an education. There's going to be again, an evolution of the understanding on what a building management system is. It's not going to be the same as it was. You're not going to be worried about a system breaking down. You know that's going to last for 20 years. You're going to be worried about whether or not there's a vulnerability or an update that you missed that's going to cause a problem. Maybe the time of year changed and now your AC doesn't come on at the same time. So there's going to be a new, it's all going to be about education, to be honest with you.
I think my answer is it doesn't have to be that way. Absent action, it will be. I think it is, you think about the use of IT type systems in a building management world, you have to approach it actually very similar to the way the IT groups do, which is they're constantly thinking about backwards compatibility. When you talk to an IT firm, they talk to you about N minus something. I support the current version and the prior 2 versions of whatever. The world is rapidly moving from it being about hardware to it being about software. And so what's really, really important as you pick building systems and building software, whether it is cloud-based software and the data storage that they use, or whether it's the hardware and software and controllers in the building, this is a question that you now have to consider from a procurement standpoint, from a specification standpoint. What is that company willing to commit to in terms of backward compatibility and forward compatibility? Am I going to be able to have access to the next generation? And are you going to support the last 2 generations? Are you going to give me that 15 or 20 years? Absent that structure, yeah, what you're going to get is flavor of the day. Every 18 months it'll be something new and you have to rip it out and replace it with the newest thing. The IT industry's worked through that and solved that. As a buildings industry, we need to make sure we follow that lead.
Yeah, I really agree with Greg on this one. I don't think it has to be that way. And the other thing I would say is, how many of you bought a car that had the early GPS system in it? Right? We all bought those. It worked really great for a while until the roads changed, right? Or you went somewhere that didn't exist in the map or whatever. It needed to be updated, right? And so my premise where I'm going with this is I think expectations are changing, right? How many of you would buy technology like that today which is stuck with where you bought it versus continue evolving? So look at like what Tesla does. You buy a car, great, it has certain capabilities. And they will continue to provide future capabilities and continue to upgrade it and provide more value for the life of that product. And so to me, when I look at IoT and where things are going, I would say that that's where expectations are coming. I do think it's a balance, right? There is security, there are concerns. You don't want to do a flash update and shut down all the chillers or turn all the lights off when somebody's having a meeting. So we as an industry need to come together and look at the opportunity that we have in front of us to really be able to meet those needs, and I think the changing expectations of the industry, of electronics, and the customers to help them move along on that journey.
All right, so maybe I can give a good generational perspective on this. You know, with the doorbell, you know, you didn't buy that doorbell because you thought it was going to last 50 years. You bought it for convenience, safety, security. Your house is X miles away. If somebody rings the doorbell, you instantly get a text message. You can instantly see who it is. You can instantly talk to them. It's keeping your family safe. So somewhere along the lines, the benefits outweighed the costs, and I think people were going to make that decision. Also, you know, the average age of the facility management employee is about 50. So it'll be interesting to see as younger people come into the industry, they're just going to expect the equipment to do these kind of things. Now, whether or not the life cycle of the assets is going to go down or not, I think that's a big question mark for us, and we're not going to know it for another 20 years. But it's really interesting, you know, like some of the major chiller manufacturers are coming out with built-in vibration analysis directly on the chiller, and I think you know, I think they're going to have to prove, you know, does this mean a different type of maintenance service contract, or are they going to have to come out more? They're going to have to prove if that costs more, or you're really getting the benefit out of it.
I think I was just called a grumpy old man. I'm not sure.
You got millennial on you.
So we're talking about using mobile devices. I'm sorry, did we go? Yeah. So we were talking about using mobile devices to access building systems and sending data, collecting data and sending it up to the cloud. So I think we've touched a little on this, but okay, what do we do with all this data once it's up in the cloud?
So I think we begin to use it in multiple ways to change the way a building is used, and certainly to better understand how a building is used. One of the things that's been really powerful with IoT and with mobile devices so far has been we get insight into occupancy in a building that we never had before. Now, a PIR occupancy sensor was great. Somebody was there or they weren't, but we didn't know who or how many. A lot of times we didn't know for how long. We're getting a much better understanding now about how space is being used in a building. But I think the mobile devices and the next generation workforce have an even bigger impact, which is, you know, I think about my teenage kids and the concept of calling someone when they need something. And they look at me like I've lost my mind. They're like, call? Like, yeah, that thing you have that we call a phone? Like, well, it has a keyboard. Is it? They've never thought about using it as a phone, frankly. And I think that the whole idea of how occupants, tenants, people within a building interact with the building is going through a huge change right now. So what I expect to see as we think about how data is used is, A, we're going to get data not only from the building system, but from the occupants that we've never had before. And it's going to actually be far more valuable because, frankly, what's the building system there to do? Keep the occupants comfortable so that they're safe and productive. We're going to have a completely different view of that than we've had before. And when someone walks into a room and a light bulb is out, or the temperature is too hot or too cold, it's not going to be a matter of calling maintenance anymore. It's going to be an app. It's going to be a different way of interacting with the building that changes their user experience completely. And to the point that I think Stephen raised earlier, this isn't pie in the sky, this is expectation. People really expect that they're going to interact with their work environment, their car, their home, their everything differently than they have in the past. So I think how we use data is a piece of the puzzle, and certainly the analytics and the dashboards are going to drive that. I had a very fascinating conversation for the kind of mechanical folks in the room last week, where I found myself trying to explain a chiller performance curve to a CFO. And it was kind of a maddening conversation for both of us, I think. But really what it came down to was I had analytics that showed that we had reduced the load in this building by 10%. And he was thrilled, but he couldn't find it on the balance sheet. And so I ended up explaining to him that yes, we had reduced the load in the building 10%, but because of his chilled water system, 8% of that efficiency had gotten eaten up in the mechanical system because the chilled water system didn't scale the way the building load scaled. So great, I had saved him a bunch of load, but as far as he was concerned, in his words, the only kind of green I care about is the kind I can find on the bottom line. He couldn't find it on the bottom line. So we've got to be prepared for those kind of uses of data that really are going to impact more than the control system, more than IoT. This is going to dramatically impact the mechanical systems of the buildings as well.
like going after Greg. There's a lot of synergies here. To me, mobility is all around being able to access things when you want, wherever you're at. I think the other thing that comes along with that is customization, personal customization. I want to be able to get the data when I want it, how I want to go see it. And so you take that with a lot of these other technologies that are going on right now, and so we're in a unique, I think, situation where we have the cloud storage, the ability to be able to even store this much data in one place, to then be able to go bring it together in a way that we never have in the past. And so you take multiple of these things with cloud-to-cloud integration, which is a lot easier than trying to go talk the bits and bytes of all the different protocols that are out there, are just enabling new ways of looking at this data. And as Greg brought up, this explosion in big data and analytics, for us to be able to go look at the data. And it's not just a piece of equipment now. We're now evolving to equipment, to systems, to the building. And are we looking at everything holistically to then figure out what's the optimal point or way to control whatever that building is, right? Whatever that building's purpose is. And I think we are bringing the user, whether that's us all sitting in this conference room and somebody's too hot or too cold, we've all sat in meetings and we're freezing. We have no clue why the air conditioning is on so much. So very simply, how many of you are familiar with the Comfy app, right? To be able to get personal input on I'm too hot, too cold. How do I get that to somebody that can go make a difference, right? So how does the system then make a change versus based on who's the occupant or what's the current use of that facility? So I think all those things come together. Again, IoT is a part of that, but I think there's these other technologies that are helping enable that along the way.
Well, my perspective is, given the shortage in skilled labor, people are going to have that expectation that the systems are going to help tell them what to do, and the cloud is going to allow for a lot more advanced analysis of data. And to give an example of an existing industry that's already doing this kind of stuff would be just the automobile industry. You have, when you're driving your car, you're like the operator at the workstation. You have a lot of real-time data on your dashboard, how fast you're going, how many miles you've gone, and then all of a sudden, bing, you get an alarm. You don't know what's wrong with your car, but you got an alarm and you may change your behavior. You may pull over to the side of the road, but you got to take that into the garage. And nowadays, when you take a car into the garage, you have to know computer, you have to have the computer training, because when you plug that computer in, it's pulling all the data from the car, it's analyzing that data, checking it with the cloud. All of a sudden, you're checking this asset against the performance of many other similar assets, and then diagnosing exactly what might be wrong with that car, and it helps these technicians to better do their job more effectively. And I can see a similar route going with facility management.
Okay, so now you're taking not just your building data, you can model everything that's going on in your building. You can look at your access, your temperature, all this information, and you can model it. You can put that into how you're managing your building. You can make changes that you would never see before. You don't need a guy sitting at a console waiting for that alarm to go off, waiting for the buzzer to go off. He doesn't have to sit and stare at that screen. He's going to be, sitting out by the pool, and his phone's going to make a noise, and he's going to look at it and say, oh, there's a problem, I need to go address it. So on the other side of that, you're also using occupant data. So now an individual, my name, my address, perhaps my phone number, my email address, everything we're all worried about with hacking when it comes to identity theft. You've now exposed that in the cloud. So now you're not just securing your building information, you're now securing your occupants' information. Now you have to worry about, well, quite frankly, a lawsuit. When somebody's bank account gets hacked because their data, and it's not going to just be, what temperature they like their house to be or their unit to be. It's going to be more data than that because you're going to have more. The whole idea of this cloud is to nexus all this massive amounts of information and model against it and make predictions on it. You're going to save money. You're going to make changes to the way you run your building. But now you've exposed or potentially exposed individual information. The same thing we all worry about. I think you're next.
So building on that, 15, 20 years ago, building systems had their own dedicated network, twisted shielded pair, proprietary communications. Now more and more they're residing on the building's network. Not just controllers, but sensors now. Some sensors are even wireless. So given that, how do we manage security?
Trying to bring ArcNet back with
ArcNet forever.
Absolutely, there are challenges with connectivity and how to go get connected, and there's many different ways. Using the customer's LAN absolutely is a way. There are technologies that are keeping up with that, with VLANs and everything else. But it is a real, I think we all struggle with it. How do we have that discussion with the customer so they feel comfortable of what are we doing on their LAN, what kind of data, what do we have access to? The good news is there are other technologies that are coming along, right? So cellular technologies are coming down a lot in cost to be able to go create other LANs, to be able to go work on different ways of getting this data out. I think the industry will continue to work on standards to be able to help along this discussion. Even in our interaction, customers are more and more, the IT departments are getting this request more and more, and so they're getting educated as well, because you think about 5, 7 years ago, when you had discussions of, we want to put the HVAC systems on the building network, those are really tough conversations. I would say always great to have the owner as the internal champion to be able to go drive that. So I think it's more things have become web-enabled, is what I'm saying, and access to the customer's LAN. There is a natural tendency there for synergy to be able to go put those on the customer's LAN. So there's not one easy answer, I guess is what I'm saying. I think there's a variety of answers based on what it is. But I would say the maturity of the customer's IT organization is greatly helping in these discussions to find the right solution as we go.
Thank you.
I think there's two key components to security for IoT. It's data encryption and access management. Both are important at various levels for different types of organizations, depending on how staffed their IT department is. And it seems like the more security problems that come up, the more solutions that come in the marketplace, like some of the cell data VPN solutions. So security is a very high concern, so you got to be working with a company that really has the domain knowledge and technology to support the needs of your IT department. Siemens, for as scared as people are about security, it's your job to make people scared. We have remote connectivity solutions that we have built out of Siemens Healthcare, and it's secure enough to connect to hospitals. Hospitals are allowing this. So when you get to the level of Fortune 500 companies and hospitals, and you can build a secure solution, I think we're going to be okay in terms of certain things, like, we're just poking some data out. And the interesting thing is with security is, from a legal perspective, people don't know what to do with it from a legal perspective. We're still developing new laws around the internet and security. So a lot of interesting conversations happening around that, I'm sure you know.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You've been waiting for this question all the time.
Yeah. Well, all right, so I'm going to get beat up at the end of this, I know this. IP networks are secure. You know, for the most part, that's old hat. Everyone's got an IT department, they're keeping their IT, you know, their IP networks secure. Now you introduce RF. You introduce an IoT device that's using wireless technology. You have now a bridge, and I'm not talking about wireless network, not you know, 802.11, the standard, you know, your wireless routers. You know, a lot of these devices have their own proprietary wireless communication protocols. And some of them, and I'm happy to say, by the way, that I did a little homework, and Honeywell is absolutely at way ahead of this. They are secure, and you know, I didn't really do any homework here, but I know Honeywell's secure, and I'm assuming you guys are as well. I am definitely going to get beat up, I know.
Not by everyone.
Well, the ones that aren't beating me up, you're going to get my back, I'm hoping. But as you introduce these, you know, non-standard or internally standardized RF communications, you're now creating a bridge between a hack point and your IP network. And again, it's not a fear and, you know, all, you know, freak out sort of thing. It's an education thing. It's understanding every time you add a device like this, you want to be compliant with what the manufacturer's done. The 274 pages of security documentation, someone's got to read that. Someone's got to, you know, when you implement these things, you need to understand every single point that you create as a vulnerability. It's easy to take a piece of equipment and bolt it onto your already existing IoT, you know, network or web, but now you need to understand what the manufacturer intended for, you know, how did he intend that to be installed? You're going to want to keep a close loop with the manufacturer, with the developer. You're also going to want to keep up to date with firmware updates and software. You know, again, it's really going to come down to being compliant with what the design specifications recommend.
The security challenges with IoT are really in three buckets: people, process, and a plan. All of you are familiar, most of you are familiar with the concept of continuous commissioning and the reality that a building management system and the mechanical systems in a building are only as good as the day you put them in and commission them. And cybersecurity is exactly the same way. Even to a greater degree. The Texas A&M curves say you can recommission a building about every 3 years and you'll be okay. I can tell you that in the cybersecurity world, sometimes you can't go 3 weeks and things will be okay. But it is not hard, it is not impossible, it is not unknown. It comes down to understanding at the device level, at the system level, and at the people managing the system level, what the tasks are that need to happen on an ongoing basis from the day the system is designed all the way through the life cycle of the system. It is possible to implement incredibly secure systems. I do it and have to have those systems accredited by DoD every year. It can be done. It is not incredibly expensive, but it requires expertise and it requires focus. No different than keeping a mechanical system requires expertise and focus. So I would say it's a new skill that's coming into the building management world as a result of IoT, but it's not something to be afraid of. It's just something to recognize that there's an enormous amount of benefit to IoT. There's also a cost, and a lot of that cost is in how you manage the devices, how you manage the system security.
Thank you. And now for one last question before we open it up to the audience. Some of these questions are being partially answered ahead of time, but the last question is, as a follow-up, how do we ensure that a company designs is implemented in the way it was intended? So we touched on it that, you know, we're spending the resources to make sure that they are safe, but once it leaves the installer's hands, how do you make sure it's implemented in the right way?
So it's actually a question we're getting from a lot of IT departments right now. Is you know, we accredit, we test, we accept the system. How do we make sure that it's being properly managed and maintained. And the good news is that BMS systems are actually a lot more predictable than most things in the IT world. A temperature sensor sends temperatures. We know what those look like. A chiller sends a given set of values, whether they're Modbus, whether they're BACnet. We know what those look like. The patterns that we expect from devices in the in the IoT world and BMS are some of the most predictable that there are in the network. When the big incident happened with the denial of service attack, 2 million cameras were used to attack Amazon and some others recently. Any IT system that had monitoring and management in there immediately recognized those cameras were sending something they weren't supposed to send and shut those ports down. So the ability to manage and automate to ensure that the system is operating the way it's intended over the life cycle. There are monitoring and management tools for the device, just like there are analytics for the chillers and the air handlers. That's how you achieve it.
As Greg mentioned earlier, this idea of continual audit or continuous commissioning in our world, I think can get applied the same way, right? I think if we ask any of us, what is our biggest security risk? It's probably the users, right? They're either going in, they're changing settings, they're writing their username and password down, whatever it is. And so I liked how you said it, it's always as secure as day one when it got installed. But then what happens? As soon as you leave that, it's like the performance of the building, right? I think the same thing can get applied. So smarter systems to do self-diagnostics, continuing to audit to make sure things are there, picking a good partner that can go help with these audits or making sure that the latest software patches are applied, or even looking at the products themselves. Are the patches updated automatically? Does somebody have to come out and do it? Those are all things that IoT is starting to bring to the surface. And I think having owners ask different questions and doing a little bit more research to understand what the features and functions are happening today. And I think the IT department is getting much more engaged, and we'll see where that relationship goes. How much of this do they get involved with the firewalls, with the port scannings, with the virus protection, all those other things. I think in the next couple of years, we will see some changes here to be able to go do it, because this is happening more and more, right? And it's getting more airtime and more visibility at the executive level for us to be able to go have solutions that can take care of it. I think it is a solvable problem, especially when we work together to be able to go do these. And a lot of the things are simple. When you look at the things where there are problems, it was not something super complex. It was basic security protocols that are not being followed today, let alone the things that are going to happen in the future.
So a lot of agreement from me on how to make it happen. It's interesting when you look at building automation systems and security from the perspective of getting them accredited, because that's one important thing to maybe ask for with your partner. You know, what level of security do you follow and what standards do you follow? But when you really start looking at some of the standards, a lot of the controls of how to meet those standards are completely outside of the automation system. And so it could be simple security management on your Windows machine, you know, accessing the building automation system via passwords and user accounts. So the world of IT is, you know, converging more and more onto the building automation system.
Well, yeah, we all agree there. This is the one part that I think we're all very level on is you know, the security is engineered into these things. And again, from day one, they're very secure. And I don't want to, you know, make it sound like they're not. The biggest breakdown on every part of the IT world, whether it's in building management or, you know, just securing your IP network, is the human sitting in front of the keyboard. You know, there's going to have to be audits. Whether it's automated auditing, you know, and you know, what you were saying earlier, or you know, auditing a process or a policy or a procedure. There's going to be protocols. is a password taped to the underside of a keyboard. These are the really simple, stupid things. That's where hacks happen 90% of the time. In my world, when I need to, it's ethical hacking, so I'm not doing bad things. But when I go after this, the low-hanging fruit really comes down to the mistake an individual made, not an engineer. Engineers make very few mistakes, and there's a lot of layers between that engineer and the installation of that piece of equipment. There are very few layers between the individual sitting in front of that piece of equipment and the mistake that ultimately gets made.
Thank you. At this point, I'll open it up for questions from the audience.
Honeywell.
Sure.
Now, I'm on the backside of receiving that DOD from all your cameras, and you said you just closed the ports, to get that camera off the line, which is good. I'm glad you did that. Now you've got 200,000 cameras that are offline because they were hacked. What do you do? What are you going to do? You can't bring the camera back on because it's got the vulnerability in the camera.
Right.
What happens?
So one of the things that I think many of, certainly our peer companies participate in, but we all participate in, Department of Homeland Security's ICS CERT process, where when a vulnerability is found, we publish it, and then we publish, if you will, the fix for that. So in the case of the cameras, for example, it was a huge range of cameras, there were two key vulnerabilities. One was unprotected telnet services, and the other was bunches of devices with root passwords that had never been changed, that were just using defaults. So we did two things in that specific case. One was we released new firmware that did lock down all the ports and make it much harder to attack the camera. But the other thing we did was we changed the installation routine so it was impossible to install the device without changing the root password. And those are the kinds of things that, to this point about automation, today you can read the 274-page book and you can get it right, but it's incumbent upon us as an industry not to have that be the solution. The solution is the product needs to do a much better job of protecting the system and the end user. And simple changes like that. You can't install the device without changing the default password. That's how we're going to get there.
Thank you. Next question.
So we've heard a lot about individual buildings and what you can do to better manage them and the energy flow and the security in one building. The question would be, do you know of any initiatives to aggregate that to a much larger level, from the home to the building to a community to an entire city, and to have those pieces communicate and then to draw new insights from the patterns, energy flows, traffic flows, etc.?
Sure. I'll start and gladly share it with others. Yes, I mean, that vision of smart cities is emerging very rapidly. We're doing projects right now in Asia, in the Middle East, and India that all have that kind of a vision and goal. More interestingly, in the US is we've seen GSA, for example, do that with several thousand government buildings that they're the landlords for, to great result. Both CBRE and JLL are starting to do it with their entire property portfolios. So we are beginning to absolutely see that trend. Now, a smart city is trying to look at a lot more than just the building and the building energy use. But you talk to utilities frequently, you look at their grid congestion and their transmission problems, and they say, wow, if we could just see and solve the commercial building piece of this, it would make an enormous difference to the way we operate the grid, particularly with so many renewables. So I think there are business reasons that will continue to get worked and solved. There's a brand new protocol for smart grid that's designed to make it possible not only for the utility to tell the building things like, we need you to shed load right now, but for the building to actually tell the utility, based on tomorrow's weather forecast, my load is going to look like this, and the utility to be able to establish pricing on that basis. So I think there is a much bigger play for that smart building and that interoperability than even what we see today.
I would agree with all of that, and just, again, bad guy, bigger target. You know, and now you're dealing with individuals, lots of individuals. You know, there's a lot of promise to that, though. You know, you're talking, you know, the green movement. You see some of this in California. Florida could absolutely benefit from this. You know, during the summer, our heat's out of control. We get people who have brownouts all the time. There's lots of benefit to this. There's also lots of risk. Again, just it's an awareness thing.
Maybe just a couple things that I've seen. You know, there are more projects being bid out for entire communities to be self-served by a single automation system from the lights down to the freaking toilet, and it's really happening. So some of the bigger companies do have some initiatives about intelligent infrastructures and smart cities, and security is gonna play a role there.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more integration with the power companies, right? And as Greg said, we have activities going on today. Think about the buildings as a resource, not just as a consumer, but being able to put power back on the grid. And what I mean by that is reducing power. But you think of, even in our domain of ice, to be able to then take chillers offline, burn ice during the peak part of the day, go move the energy usage to at night. Now we can work with that utility company. So it's not just group purchasing, which is kind of where your question started. We can go do that today, but I think it's more of a partnership. To me, I think of group purchasing as we're going to go and try to get our lowest price possible to buy energy. That's part of it, but
batteries, the power.
yeah, you bet. And so I think as the grid becomes smarter and we can have these different dialogues with the power companies, there's going to be a lot different discussion. You mentioned, Greg, you actually mentioned in California and we do it in Texas today, is real-time pricing. So how do you know when to use energy, right? And that, again, that's a two-way street, working with the power company to say, I will use energy to help you as an organization because it's a win-win, so that they don't have to bring on their peakers or whatever it is, which costs them a lot of money. So security is going to be important in all this, and there are a lot of new standards that are coming out, and they have that. As you can imagine, the power company has a whole bunch of regulations to help them control that.
Next question. Way in the back.
So I feel like over the last few years, the whole bring your own device debate is kind of ended, and most companies are just saying, go ahead, bring it, we'll secure it. If you're bringing in an IoT mentality into a large corporate environment, does that debate get renewed? How do you standardize that? What are your thoughts about handheld devices?
Yeah, most IT departments, to your point, at first were like, oh my God, right? There's no way, right? Standard IT response, no. And then, okay, let's talk about this. And then finally, I think they've seen the wave coming, just saying, wow, there's so much of this out here. How do we handle this? It will be interesting, how does IoT play into that? So does not just your phone and your iPad, but are there other devices that are going to come along? I think I'm reading into your question, if I understand this correctly, is what about other things? What about other devices that an employee or a user, an occupant of the building might bring along that also wants to now connect to the whatever whether it's Wi-Fi or wired LAN, whatever those protocols are, and how do they interact, and how are they all managed to be able to go do that and make sure that they don't get into the business systems. I'm not seeing that from a user perspective in customers today. I'm not seeing them being asked that, but I think it's one of the hurdles that we have to get over. I think, and so I'm on a soapbox here for a little bit, but I think the key tipping point for IoT, which we haven't done yet, is the standards, right? Everybody still has their own little protocols, their own little ways of communicating. For me, I see the pattern today is everybody brings it back to their cloud, and we do cloud-to-cloud integrations, right? That's how most of the data goes and gets transferred. And so maybe that's a way that happens in the future, or does that integration happen on the edge in that customer's building? Those are things, to me, that still have to get worked out yet.
All right, so at Markham, we have a bring your own device policy, and again, there's going to need to be standards. You know, in the world of bring your own device, everyone has customizations. Everyone has done something to their device to make it their own. Once you bring that into a bring your own device environment, there's a certain degree of that customization that's going to go away. Mobile device management is the buzzword. You can bring your own device, but now you've installed an app that, you know, the flashlight app that everyone knows about was a bad app, had bad code in it, was stealing information. I think it was contact information that it was publishing. So now you're going to have to be compliant with an internal policy. So there's that balancing act. You will see lots more bring your own devices, and in the scenario of a smart city, that gets infinitely more complex. You will see lots more bring your own devices, and you will see lots more need for standardization and mobile management and setting a threshold for just how far you're going to customize a device that's going to come into the fold.
It's kind of a question near and dear to my heart because it's something we've had to deal with over the last 12 months. And the answer in our case was a very structured, tiered security model. There's the public outside world, highest threat. There's the bring your own device world, which is slightly less of a threat. Then there is what we call our DMZ, and then there is our production network environments. We have made a very conscious decision that some devices and some things can be trusted more than others. And we've got a tiered security architecture that allows us to deal with that. The opposite question, interestingly enough, has been asked by a number of IT departments of us lately, which is, what is our liability for putting our app on somebody else's device? If we tell an employee who works for us that their cafeteria app or their canteen app or their Comfy app or whatever is available on our company website to load on their device, as a company, what then becomes our liability if their personal data is compromised or lost? So it's an area that I think is evolving quickly, but we've decided that trusting devices isn't an all or nothing game. You have to make kind of tiered decisions. We have to trust the controllers, but we have a lot more control over the controllers. Things like a web browser on an IoT device, a smartphone, whatever, we don't necessarily have to trust that device nearly as much.
In agreement with what everyone said here, my thoughts just run to, there's a reason people are doing these things. They're not just doing it because IoT is cool and hey, look what we can do. I mean, first thing I think of is our IT department trying to save money. They don't have to throw cost at paying for a machine. Other people can pay for it, but there's got to be an incentive for people to use their own device for work and everything. I think the same applies everywhere with all the economic activity that's happening. It's making life easier and more efficient for people, and that'll continue to go that way as long as there's some type of business benefit behind it.
Any other question?
So now you have all this data and all this information, and now you have all these new players that are coming into the picture. You have attorneys, you have marketing people, and you have people that want to monetize this information. So how do we protect our customers, and how corporations, big corporations, they start taking responsibility and owning some of these issues in terms of security, in terms of monitoring, in terms of warranting the installations of these IoT systems and equipment.
From a developer standpoint.
I think the interoperability is key there. I mean, you bring up a good point. I mean, as soon as all these there's hundreds of small companies, you know, wanting to connect different devices, and that could eventually affect warranty on certain automation systems to say maybe we won't keep up our warranty if we're doing X amount of integrations. As the information goes to the cloud, I think a lot of customers and the legal people are really concerned about personally identifiable information. We haven't seen any instances where there's a lot of that with building data. And then we're having, as I mentioned earlier, you know, there's talking with our lawyers and everything, you know, there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, it's such a new industry that a lot of the laws are brand new. A lot of laws are still coming into place. And we have to help supplement the security. We have to follow certain laws. In case of certain data breaches, you have to notify all your customers within X amount of hours and provide some certain information around that.
Real simply, that's going to be like everything else we do. Every time you install a version of Windows or any other application, you agree to an end user license agreement. And that's ultimately where the attorneys are going to have their day. You're going to find out, unfortunately, after the fact, because nobody ever reads those things. I don't read those things. It's the fine print. You've agreed to something that you just don't know. You've signed a contract and you never read it.
I think there's a very key question in what you asked, which is any owner installing a system should be looking very closely today at who owns the data. It's the net neutrality data privacy question that's in the news right now in terms of your web browser. But the question of who owns the data that a customer's building management system generates is a very, very key question for any customer and their legal department to determine when they buy the system. I have customers who actually are less worried about the names of their employees than they are about the energy consumption that would reveal the production on one of their production lines, because that can be used to manipulate their stock. So it's, you know, different customers are sensitive to very different things. Certainly, particularly in Europe, there are great privacy regulations out there and they're enforcing them with a hammer. And for multinational companies, they're setting the standard right now for us. But I do think any customer right now should be stopping and making sure they own the right to their data and they own the right to give their data to third parties for the purposes of doing analytics, if that's what they want to do. That is a key legal question, and it's easily solved in a contract document if you know to ask the question.
Agree with everything I said there around end user license agreement, and I think owners are going to start to get smarter about what questions to ask around how are you protecting my data, right? Is it encryption at rest? Is it encryption on transport? What does that look like? Who owns the data is a great question. I think also is, and what are you going to, who's going to do what with the data, right? So is it going to be resold? Are you usually going to use it internally? What does that look like? I think unfortunately it's going to take an incident to probably bring this really to the surface, unfortunately. We're trying to be as proactive as we can and working with our customers and having them understand that, making sure that their data is protected. I totally agree with Greg. What Greg said is different customers, you can think about different vertical markets, they really care about different things. So that makes it doubly hard where you almost need to, which is what we do, secure everything, but that's also really hard to go do, right? To be able to go do that. My biggest worry or my biggest thing that keeps me up at night is as we think about IoT, as we think about single sign-on, who do you trust? And I liked your example, Greg, I really did, of the layered security, right? I mean, that's the only way to go after security. Where does that fit on your trusted partners? To me, you know, single sign-on is a great technology to solve the user part that we talked about earlier. How do you make it as easy for the user as possible so that they're not writing all these passwords down? If they can remember one, they'll probably then be a little bit more responsible for how is that, right? Technology, two-factor authentication, we can help with that, but I think that's where the challenge is going to be, is another vendor, right, that you trust comes in and be able to do it. The app example I think was a great one, but that happening at a larger scale to be able to go in a way that we haven't even thought about today.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm the chief engineer of the Bank of America building right there, and I just changed the colors of the building to my phone to an IP address, to a VPN, a VP to the IP. And I also go into my train controls to the IP address instead of the app, because I don't trust apps to come into my building. What is the difference between the IP and an app? Going through an IP to a VPN.
I can start. So your IP address that you go to, right, you're hitting a web page, you're hitting something on your building. You made the comment about, and I'm sorry we're going technically on technology, but you mentioned a VPN, right? So now you are creating a secure tunnel from your device, your mobile device, whatever it is, your computer, your mobile, into that network. And so your device is almost like it's sitting on you in that building on your network to be able to access that web page, for example, that the IP address that you're hitting. What an app does is it kind of builds in that VPN tunnel, or it builds in that handshake, so that you don't have to go use the VPN is one way that this happens. So that you type in the app, your username and password, it then does the authentication so that you can get access to it. So you can think of it as a different user experience. There are devices that have both, right? So it allows the flexibility to be able to get at it. I think that was your question. Somebody else want to?
Sure. Yeah, I think kind of a simple answer would be either one of them can be incredibly secure and either one of them can be incredibly insecure. I'm a Bank of America customer, and I can tell you I have the Bank of America app on my phone right here.
I'm not Bank of America, right?
Yeah, but I want to make the point that an app in a lot of cases can do a better job of controlling a security environment than an IP address can, only because the IP address is then using the web browser on your phone, which is something that's outside of the security environment. Whereas the app can actually control the security environment that it exists in a way that just an IP address connection can't. But there isn't a right or a wrong answer there. Either one of them can be done very, very securely. I think the thing that's key with apps is an app that's more than 6 months old should worry you. And I say that just very generically right now about any app you have that you use for any kind of thing. If you're not seeing it regularly updated and refreshed, that's a cause for concern, because the security environment is changing so rapidly right now that very few things written 6 months ago can still absolutely be secure.
Yeah, I'll echo all of that. In the case of talking directly to your IP address, this is an exposed point out on the internet. Now, obviously you can employ lots of security on the other end of that. How you authenticate from where you are to that IP address, are you transmitting a password, or are you just transmitting, and Joe's gonna love this, a hash value, where you're not transmitting something that's backwards engineerable and can be hacked and used later to assume your identity. So there's a lot of mechanisms that can be put in play there with the IP address, but that's something that you're going to be managing internally. Whereas in the case of an application or an app on your phone, yeah, you want that regularly updated. Bank apps are always updated. Those are the ones that you always have an update for is your bank app, because they are worried about that. They have the facility to constantly adapt to the threats. So it comes down to, are you offloading that trust to the app creator or whoever is managing that app, or are you having that internally done and you're going to manage that responsibly?
Rich, if you can make those lights turn green in the next 10 minutes.
Give me about 15 minutes. Let me, can I see your phone?
No, he wants to hack it.
What's that IP address?
Find the IP address. You can hack into it.
Okay.
Just want to make
One
one
last
point.
question.
When XP was released, they said it was the most secure. Then Vista was released, and they said it was the most secure.
Every time you add new features, you add new bugs. So when you say you update it, you may be closing old bugs, but you may be creating new ones. Look at Flash.
Yeah.
So damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, I think that's very true. The only thing that I will say is that the tools, and I'll speak for our development environment now, that the tools that are now run against code before it's allowed to be released are so much better than the tools that we would have used 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, that the amount of stuff that escapes now is dramatically lower. Yes, you're right. Every time you add functionality, you do 2 things. You increase the attack surface because there's just more code, and you open the opportunity to introduce a new vulnerability or a new defect. And I do think it's something that we spend a lot of time with our developers on. You always struggle with software developers about taking stuff out. You know, it's easy to get them to put stuff in, it's hard to get them to take stuff out. But it's really, really important that they take old code out. Because if they don't, to your point, they tend to leave vulnerabilities, and we end up finding them later with security scans credit to our customers. Probably 3 or 4 times this year, I've gotten already calls from a customer who said, hey, we scan your system and we have a concern. And you look at that and you go, wow, this is a real partnership. This is the way we want to work with our customers. Now, some cases there were false positives. In one case, at least, it was a real concern. So I do think there's going to be that kind of relationship with customers' IT departments, and in a lot of cases, third parties that they bring in to accredit and test their systems. Most of my big customers are having somebody externally audit their systems in addition to the stuff they do.
Keeping with your, Windows XP, when Windows XP came out, it was relatively secure at the time. About 30 minutes after it came out, it wasn't. So you've got people, there's the camp that regularly updates, and everyone goes and does their Windows update, and they install their antivirus software, and it's an education thing, it's an understanding thing. You have people that are, to this day, still running Windows XP and have not run any patches and haven't done any installations of upgrades. So, there's an evolution in that software, there's an evolution in the technology. You don't know what you don't know until after you know it. And, people like Honeywell and Trane, these guys at Siemens, you do find a lot of getting ahead of that curve. They test this stuff. There's going to be things that their customers are going to find that they missed, or threats that didn't exist at the time that it was manufactured. So again, it's a constant evolution. There is no such thing as a 100% secure system. It doesn't exist. Never going to exist. It's about education. It's about training. Again, you're going to have a third party, someone who's going to come in, again, like a Markham, who's going to come in, who's constantly thinking about these things. We do this internally. We are an incredibly secure network. Some of our users hate it because there's a lot of hurdles to get through, but it keeps us safe. We can apply that externally too. So it's about an understanding, and it's always that bar is constantly moving.
I just want to add one other thing. The other thing I would say about patching systems and vulnerabilities is this. There's the one-off hack. There is the true hacker who goes out there and bangs on your system until they find a hole. But the bigger danger right now to most of us is that once that hacker does that, he takes that exploit and he sells it on the dark net to a group of people who take hundreds of those exploits and package them up in a kit and sell them on the net to other hackers. And catching a vulnerability and getting it patched before that kit is sold hundreds or thousands of times to other hackers is what we chase every day. That's what we worry about, is that once a vulnerability exists, how long before it is in the wild as a broadly known exploit. So there is a real sense within the development community now that you can't wait 6 months to fix this thing, because if you do, someone will have sold it to someone who will have sold it to someone who will have literally commercialized it. It's an amazing marketplace.
Okay, I'm going to end on that. We ran over about 40 minutes. It was a great discussion. I'd like to thank Paul, Stephen, Rich, Greg, and all your companies, Trane, Siemens, Markham, and Honeywell, for the generosity of your time in coming here. Thank you for enlightening us. And I'd like to thank everybody, the South Florida Technology Alliance, and all the loyal ASHRAE members for coming tonight. Thank you. Let's see if we can get some dinner.